And a special welcome to all those who are joining us online for today's forum. This weekend we welcome the Reverend Jane Brown from the Spirit Works Foundation. Jane is also an ordained deacon of the Episcopal Diocese of Southern Virginia and also serves as the Executive Director of the Spirit Works Foundational Center for the Soul, a recovery organization in Williamsburg, Virginia. She earned a master's degree in addiction studies from King's College London, and in 2015 was appointed by then presiding Bishop Catherine Jefferts Shorey to the Church's Commission on Impairment and Leadership. In addition to all that, she is also past chair of Faces and Voices of Recovery and a past board member of Episcopal Recovery Ministries. And so it's wonderful to have someone with her background and experience to join us on this Wellness and Recovery Sunday. First, let us pray using a collect from the prayer book. O blessed Lord, you ministered to all who came to you. Look with compassion upon all who through addiction have lost their health and freedom. Restore to them the assurance of your unfailing mercy. Remove from them the fears that beset them. Strengthen them in the work of their recovery. And to those who care for them, give patient understanding and persevering love. Amen. Welcome. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Is this thing on? Okay, perfect. And do I have to stand behind here?
No.
Okay, good. So my name is Jan. As was mentioned, one of the pieces that often doesn't get mentioned is that I am a woman in long-term recovery. And for me, that means that I haven't used drugs or alcohol for a bit over 35 years. And as a result of that, all of the things that were shared about me are getting to come true. Is that better? Yeah. Sorry about that. I pushed it, it became green and then yellow. Oops, I think I touched it again. I'm going to stop touching it now. So thank you all for having me. I had prepared this really fancy PowerPoint presentation, and then I decided to scrap it because I want to be a bit more conversational. There's a couple of videos that I have, and again, I hope that we can have some dialogue. When I talk about addiction and recovery, I'm going to do so from a different framework that many of us are familiar with. Many of us know the 12 steps of recovery, are members of Alcoholics Anonymous or one of the other programs that ends with Anonymous. And what I'm going to talk about today is really breaking open this understanding of recovery as most of us know it. And I'm going to start with this little guy. His name is Jackson. Jackson is now 8 months old. He is in my care. My spouse and I, he came to us when he was 1 month old. Jackson was born with what's called neonatal abstinence withdrawal syndrome. A mouthful, right? NOWS, or NAWS is what it's known as. Short form, Jackson was born substance exposed. So his mother is a person who uses drugs, and as a result, when he was born, he needed to spend 30 days in the NICU withdrawing from the drugs that were in his body, her body, and so he was administered methadone for those first 30 days. And I share that with you mostly because if you take away nothing else from our time together, babies are not born addicted, right? So that's one of the things that we've, for whatever reason, a piece of misinformation, frankly, it's wrong information. They're not born addicted, they're born substance exposed, they're born with fetal alcohol withdrawal syndrome or neonatal abstinence withdrawal syndrome. And the big reason of that is because babies don't have the opportunity to have the course of addiction to take place. Does that make sense? Right, so addiction involves a process where you go and seek drugs and continue to use drugs despite catastrophic consequences. When you're in utero, none of those things can happen, right? So he was born exposed to the substances that his mother had been using, and they were passed on to him. So he was born substance exposed. Very important point. Again, if you learn nothing else, meet Jackson, born substance exposed. If anyone also has questions as we're going through this, please feel free to ask. I so often hear, oh, you have a addicted baby. And I think, oh boy, it's time for education. So I like to begin with that. All right, would you start? So what we're going to do is we're going to have some experiences around misinformation moving to proper information. So yes, we'll watch this first video and we'll talk about it on the other side. So was anyone moved by seeing that video? Yeah. Yeah. How many of us are mostly familiar with the kind of first section of words that were up there? Things like addict and denial and junkie and rock bottom and et cetera, et cetera. And then that second set of words, much more hopefulness, optimism, resilience. So those are again, words matter. And part of what we know, especially the one that I often highlight, is the word, or the two words, rock bottom. And it's certainly, again, I grew up in a culture where we talked about people needing to hit bottom in order to recover. And certainly within that culture, there's an understanding of that kind of language, but more public language, more accurate language around the issue of rock bottom is that rock bottom is death, right? So I work with parents whose children have died. Those children have hit rock bottom. They're not coming back. They're not going to have the opportunity to recover. And so they get very anxious when people say you have to hit rock bottom, one, because it's not accurate, and two, because they know the experience of the death and loss of their children. So that's one that I like to highlight. Another one, I mean, most of the words that you saw in the first part were people calling names, right? Addict, junkie, clean, dirty. So again, those things grew up from a particular type and style and culture of recovery. They don't belong to the larger recovery movement. We don't say that other people's blood is clean or urine is clean. We don't say those kinds of things. We say that somebody tested positive or that there was something in their system, right? So it really perpetuates the stigma and the shame and the isolation that people feel when they're being called names like junkie and addict and those types of things. Questions or comments? So my other vocation is coaching. So I'm very, it's like if you have any questions, it's a hard video to watch sometimes, because again, many of us grew up with saying a lot of those words, and this is a new way of, some people say, well, Jan, it's just semantics. And that's not true, because the science tells us that those words are not correct. The science also tells us that for those people who we care about and we value in this world, recovery is the expectation, right? So there's particular groups of people, physicians, other healthcare professionals, airline pilots, fighter pilots in the Navy, now students, college students, for whom recovery is the expectation. We know the resources and the needs, and when we bring those to bear, people get well and stay well, right? I had the good fortune, or not, so I'm considered a recovery leader, and so whenever something big happens during September, which is Recovery Month, or somebody needs to say something important from the Office of National Drug Control Policy, Jan gets to go to the White House. So I was in the previous administration White House, and I got to offer a prayer, which was really fun. This go round, a couple weeks ago, I was at the White House, and we call him the drug czar. His big concern is that over 100,000 people are dying every year, and we need to do better. We must do better. We can do better if we move beyond some of the old models, remove that stigma and shame that exists, and really rely on the science and rely on compassion. And for me, that whole piece of compassion is where church folk come in, and I get really excited, because that's what we do better than anybody else, right? I would tell seculars when I'm presenting, it's like, that's our secret sauce, right? I mean, that's who we are. We lead with the love of Christ, we lead with our compassion. And so my goal is always trying to equip people with language, with understanding, being able to change hearts and minds, so that we are able to truly minister effectively to individuals and families and to the community around issues of addiction and recovery. Questions or comments? Yes?
So I have an adult child, and for lack of knowing the best way to say it, he's an addict. He has now been sober, let's say 7 months. I feel like we've cycled through this once every decade, beginning in high school. So you flash the words from what were thrown in the secular society. I've used a lot of those, but I'm not to the second set of words. I think there's this middle ground for me. So as a parent of a child who has, I don't know if he's done it or I've allowed it, but his addiction issues, his choices have shaped the context of our family of 4 from the time he was, let's say, 15.
Absolutely.
And now I'm sandwiched between his addiction and his Alzheimer's. His Alzheimer's Association proclaims hope, hope, hope. NA, AA, hope, hope, hope. I don't get the hope. I'm very skeptical. I try to be supportive, but as a mother, I'm stepping back to try to preserve and protect myself. So what role should I really be playing, if any?
The one you just said, to be his mother and to love him as his mother, and to support the connection of him being able to take care of himself in his recovery, right? We would do it with any other illness. What's so difficult is the direct impact that his illness has had on you, right? So I imagine if he was anything like me, that he told lies often, that he may have stolen, that he wasn't the person that you raised.
Or the person I dreamed he would be.
Absolutely. And that's a loss for you, right? And parents talk about that quite a bit, because they had expected and hoped, right, that change of hope from where the trajectory that I believe that he was going on to the one that he's on now. And so part of that is to grieve. What you also get to do is to grieve the loss of the expectations of who he was going to be and how your life was going to look. And then over time, you'll be able to grow to embrace who he is now as a young man, I would guess, in recovery from his addiction. Even again, when I say that my name is Jan and I'm a woman in recovery, people want to clap, versus my name is Jan and I'm an addict, and people have kind of a different, response to that. Again, not just semantics, actual living, there's living testimony. One of the other things in terms of how we get to hope from where you're sitting is that people who are in recovery, not those for whom, I don't come in or anywhere, we're not asked to say, or we're violating the traditions if we identify in a different way. And so by design, we're taught to say that we are people in recovery. And there are many of us who are able to be kind of put a face and voice on recovery. And so that's one of the things that we need to do as well. We have an obligation to do that so that people can get to a place of hope, because there's more than 25 million people who are in recovery. And most folks don't know that. What we see on television, what we read about in the news, is those of us who are still struggling, those of us who have succumbed to death. So we're not learning or hearing about the amazing things, the lives that we're living today. When I was at the White House, some of the cabinet members, Marty Walsh, who was the governor, no he wasn't, he was the mayor of the city of Boston, is in recovery. He won't mind me saying, because he says it himself. So that there are many of us who are doing and living remarkable lives, but people just don't know, because that's not what we hear about. It doesn't sell newspapers, it doesn't sell camera time. So always have hope. Connect with me afterwards, or make sure you get my contact information. There's a lot of resources that are available for parents. Some of the other slides or the other videos that I'll be showing also can kind of help. It's a program that we do offer with parents, with people who are carers and caregivers, family members and others, clergy in particular, so that we can learn, and hopefully it'll give you a beginning of an understanding that although you don't like it, and you don't like what your son or your loved one or whomever was doing, their behavior makes sense, which is a hard one. So we'll talk about that in just a second.
Yeah, this is a clinical question because I'm a clinician.
Sure.
Physician, and my hair is white. Now. But even from the beginning of my medical education, we were taught that addiction is a disease.
Absolutely.
It goes back a long way.
Mm-hmm.
And my question to you is there, take away that term rock bottom, but is there an identifiable turning point at which you might say to an individual,
it doesn't have to get worse than this.
yeah.
Right. So one of the pieces that came out several years ago now in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5, which is what people in the psychotherapy and mental illness world use to make diagnoses, is the recognition, much like with other disorders and diseases, that there are different degrees or depths of illness, right? So there's mild, moderate, severe, and addiction is actually on the very far end of symptomology. So when we're talking to many people, we use the term addiction, we're really even getting that wrong, because it's a very small percentage of people who would actually meet diagnostic criteria for addiction. And it's based on symptoms, right? So if you have two to three symptoms, you would be mildly addicted. If you had, or mild use disorder. If you have 3 to 6, moderate, 6 to 8, severe, and then on the very far end again is where addiction actually lives. And so what that allows us to do now is to actually offer services, supports, treatments in a way that makes sense, right? So why would somebody who is mild, in the mild stage of a use disorder, leave their home, go to treatment for 90 days, those two things don't line up, right? And so, that person doesn't need to lose everything before they enter into recovery. So some of it's education, which helps that turn or that U-turn, as we call it, But some of it is community. So it's all those really, beautiful blue words. And a lot of this information people don't know, right? I even work with clinicians who are like, what? And still are saying words like substance abuse, right? I never abused substances. I loved them. I would do anything to protect them, to get them, to use them. It was my primary relationship until I could no longer do it and stay alive. One of the things that we're seeing is, especially with younger folks, they, again, much like my little guy Jackson, they don't have the experience or the opportunity to have all of the symptoms, but the drugs that are out on our streets are so powerful that one wrong decision can take their lives. So again, if we're using extreme measures for somebody who has mild use disorder, those two things don't match up. And that's why treatment outcomes are often very poor, because the two things aren't happening properly. Other questions or comments? All right, let's do the next one.
Imagine this scenario. You're walking on the side of a two-way street when you look up and see a person trying to cross. There's plenty of traffic and you can hear cars and trucks swooshing by. The person you notice looks impatient, upset, frantic, and does not seem to be considering the danger ahead of them. Instead, all they seem to be concerned about is getting to the other side of the street. Take a moment to consider the following. What are your thoughts and feelings about this person and their behavior? And what are some actions that those thoughts and feelings make you want to take? You may be thinking, what's wrong with them? What's making them crazy enough to try and cross traffic without thinking? Are they dangerous? You may be feeling scared for what's about to happen, anxious for the person you're watching, and confused by their behavior. Some actions you may want to consider include moving away from the situation by leaving so you don't have to see the person get hurt, or engaging in the situation by yelling at them to stop to try to promote a positive outcome. Continue imagining the same scenario, only now I'll give you a little bit more information. Before you saw this person, they had been driving further down the road with their dog in the back seat. At a stoplight, the dog jumped out of the car and began running through traffic. The person is now frantically trying to get the dog back inside of the car before it gets hurt. Now take a moment to consider the following. What are your thoughts and feelings about this person after learning about their reason for trying to cross such a busy street? What are some actions those thoughts and feelings make you want to take? You might be thinking, how can I help this person? How do I keep him safe when he's upset and not thinking about his own safety? You might be feeling compassion, sadness for the person's situation, and fear it might go badly. You may be more inclined to take action by offering to help, calling for more help, or trying to intervene in some way. The purpose of this exercise is to show that when another person's behavior seems irrational or erratic or scary in some way, in the way that substance use often does, it can push us into a let me get away from this or make it stop response, and make us want to move away from it entirely. It can be hard to see how to be helpful in these situations or to even want to help, while also experiencing our own set of thoughts and emotions as a bystander. By taking a moment to put the behaviors into a larger context, by understanding the why behind their behavior, we can start to make sense of the motivation behind them. We can then decide on a productive way to move forward. So let's think back to the scenario we just imagined. If we start off deciding that the person running in the road is doing it just because they're crazy, then we are also limiting ourselves from seeing the full picture. This way of thinking is natural, but does not facilitate positive action on our part. Instead, if we decide that the person trying to cross the road has a valid or a sympathetic reason for their behavior, we open ourselves up to more understanding. We can now accept new information and learn that the person is trying to find their dog. This information will most likely shift our thoughts and emotions surrounding the behavior, and we'll then be able to come up with, and want to come up with, a productive plan on how to help them. Finally, let's put this all in the context of substance use. If we decide that a person who is using substances is doing so just because they are an addict, aka a morally bankrupt, irresponsible person, we will very effectively shut out information that could help us understand their behaviors. And without that understanding, we won't be able to find a constructive way to offer support. However, if we open ourselves up to understanding that all behaviors make sense, we will learn that people use substances for valid reasons. Examples could include using substances to ease anxiety, feel more ready to handle daily life, or get to sleep despite physical pain. This type of information will then help us begin moving forward by supporting our loved ones in a productive way.
Questions, comments? How'd that one over there, Mom? Not yet, right?
You know, it's still the why, you know, and that becomes a reflection on me. What did I do wrong as a mother? What did we do wrong as parents? On our watch, what did we miss? What did he need that we couldn't provide? And why hasn't the chain been broken now that he's 31? So, you know, I get it. You know, I've been through a lot of educational programs because we've been at this a while. Read some books on my own, continue to read. I know that we're supposed to frame this as a disease. But deep down, I wonder if it's a choice.
But that was an alcoholic.
Right.
So the short answer is it's both, right? It's a disease of choice. So no one, myself included, got up when I was a child and said, when I grow up, I want to be an alcoholic or a person who destroys my life and my family's life, and have a primary relationship with substances and not be able to do so healthy with other people, right? So I did choose to use, your son did choose to use, your loved ones or yourself chose to use. We did not choose to become addicted, right? So that's the distinction. You know, the way our brains process, you know, there's fancy chemistry and chemicals, dopamine and some of these other receptors that exist in our brain that make it such that some of us end up with use disorder and addiction and others of us do not, right? But it comes from, it's a biopsychosocial, spiritual brain matter. Rather than many of us understand, and because what we see is the symptoms, and we don't like the symptoms, right? We don't like dishonesty. We don't like stealing. We don't like being irresponsible. We don't want to be those things, but the substances, the part of our brain that it hits, changes the way we react and metabolize certain substances. It's interesting because many people have. So I have an amazing degree. I'm an international scholar on addiction studies. I have, as was mentioned by Jesse, my degree comes from King's College in London, but it also comes from the College of Virginia Commonwealth University's Med School and the University of Adelaide. So this is a program that's one of its kind. And I chose to do it on purpose, and for folks just like yourself and potentially some of you others. I chose to do it because it takes about 20 years to go from science to the general community. And then it takes about another 10 years to come all the way to real people's lives. And so that's a long time, 30 years, right? And then of that research that's done, only about 14% of it actually gets disseminated, right? So we're doing a really bad job as researchers and scientists. We know what needs to be done. The resources are there to do it. The question is, right, and we often get asked that question, both in the church as well as in the community, is why aren't we doing it, right? Why don't we have the will to do the right thing, right? And we as Christians know, we struggle with that every day, right? That's who we are. That's the nature of many of us as humans. And so being able, first and foremost, to begin to help people understand, kind of the basics, which is that piece of behavior making sense, right? How many of us want to ease our stress, right? That's a normal and natural thing to do. We want to have less anxiety. We want to be more social. We want to get sleep. We want to remove pain. Those are all reasons that people use substances. Many of us probably as well. I see some coffee drinkers out here, right? So we use substances for reasons that make sense. It's what comes along with that that's so difficult to accept and to understand. There is information that is life-changing. I commend a book to any or all of you. That what you saw in the corner is the Center for Motivation and Change, and we work with them. I happen to be on their board, but they have what's called an invitation to change, and it specifically uses science and compassion to help people understand addiction and support people on their journeys of recovery. The name of the book is Beyond Addiction, and it has been re-released. We use it at Spirit Works. The folks from ITC wrote the book. They disseminate it widely. I'm happy to send somebody a copy if you want a copy and can't find it. It has the science, and it has that missing link of compassion. Because when we do have some kind of understanding, we still don't like it, right? I still don't like it when one of the young people comes in the center. I still don't like it that my little guy's mother got pregnant again, right? I hate that that's what she did, because the likelihood that she's going to be able to care for that little guy or girl is slim to none as well. Can I have compassion for her on good days? Right? There are some days where I'm just flat out mad. When I can reground and I can connect with other people and we can talk about it, her behavior makes sense. I just don't like it. As a matter of fact, I hate it. It makes sense, and I do understand, and I can have compassion for her and her situation. Other questions or comments? Yes?
You are someone who's in recovery. Tell me what your expectation was of your loved ones when you turned the corner, so to speak, and who was helpful and who was not.
That's a great question. So my expectations, and it's an interesting place, because for me, recovery started when I decided I didn't want to die. So many people, what happens with them is they don't believe that they're going to die, especially those whose, our brains aren't fully developed until we're 25. So one of the things that, just say no was a hard one, and it's like, just say no, we want to push back how long until you say yes, so that your brain could be a little bit more grown, mature, and you can actually make a decision. So for me, it was that I didn't want to die. My parents were with me. They did the best that they could. Our relationship, probably in large part because of me, had been very fractured because of my behavior and the things that I did. And they were my cheerleaders all along the way. They often were not, because I didn't listen to them and I didn't want them to be involved. And part of that was because I knew I was doing the wrong thing, and I couldn't do the right thing, and I couldn't make it right. So I didn't want them to know what I was doing. And most people that I work with are very similar. They don't want their parents to know. If some family members knew all of the things that people with addiction, their loved ones, had done, it would be even more frightening than it may already be. So for them, what they were able to do was to make sure that the resources and services and supports that I needed were there. And it's a hard one, especially when your loved one turns 18, right? And then suddenly they're told they're an adult and that you can't decide for them. There are strategies that were used for me then and that we offer to family members now. I was on my parents' insurance. And so as grown as I thought I was, until I could pay some of my bills, we had a conversation that said, I'm going to be part of your care because you're on my health insurance. And so we were able to make that so, right? So the treatment centers and places that will say, your loved one is an adult, then we're going to deal with that person, and that person doesn't have to include you in their care. But they do. If you know to have a release of information signed, if you do some of those things that we equip and educate people to do, again, in order for safety for your loved one to get the care that they need. There's all kinds of documents, right? So I have a document that's essentially an advance directive and a living will. And so it says things like, if Jan has a return to use, this is what has to happen, right? And so my family has a copy of it, my spouse has a copy of it, my physician has a copy of it, and I made it when I was in my right mind, because I'm certainly going to change my mind if I'm using. And it becomes a legal enforceable document, right? And so I don't get to change my mind. If I say that I'm changing my mind, then they get to invite me to spend at least 72 hours in a psychiatric hospital. So again, that's another kind of insurance policy, a way to support people's care. And I had all of those things around me. Kevin McCauley is a physician who has addiction, severe substance use disorder. And one of the things that he wanted to understand was he wasn't quite sure. He was the physician for the flight doctors, for the Navy pilots, and ended up becoming addicted and taking pills that weren't his to take. And so he went to Fort Leavenworth for a period of years. And when he was there, he wanted to understand, how is this thing a disease? Because he didn't believe it. So he got books, and he did research, and he did all of the things, and he finally became convinced and accepted and understood as a scientist that addiction is a disease. So then he decided, okay, well, what are the things that are needed to support ongoing recovery and help people change their lives and keep them? And there are, probably about 10 of them, and all of them, so if you're a physician, again, there's what's called a physician impairment program, or the physician's health program. And they're all throughout many different states. Because if a physician becomes impaired, it's a public health issue, right? If your doctor is operating on you. There are programs for pilots. Those are, because it's a public safety matter if your pilot is flying the airplane impaired. If you're a lawyer, lawyers helping lawyers. Now there's an organization called Ben's Friends for people who are in the entertainment industry. And what that does is, and what they are, is they're essentially monitoring programs that keep people safe, keep people alive, add things like drug testing. Not because I'm going to punish you, but because I need to know as soon as possible that you're struggling, right? And so the way that it's addressed, treated, and supported is very, very different. One of the things I wrote my thesis on and was very interested in is impaired clergy, right? We've got lots of us. And we don't have a clergy health, wellness, or impairment program around issues of substances and impairment. And so the commission that was mentioned earlier came about as a result of former Bishop Heather Cook, it's been a number of years because she's now out of prison, who drove impaired by alcohol and drugs, crashed, killed a cyclist. So, so what is the church's response to people who are impaired as clergy? And so I went through the research and I did all of those things, and once again learned. And so, but the big question is, and you asked it a minute ago, what would make a person change, right? And so one of the things, the bottom line is meaning and purpose and spiritual connection. And that's why spirituality has been added to biopsychosocial spiritual. So with meaning and purpose, for a physician, what they want more than anything else is to get back in the operating room or to get back in their offices, whatever it is for them. For a pilot, what they want more than anything else is to fly. They want to get back in the sky. Lawyers want to get back to what they know. So my job was to go, okay, what do clergy want more than anything in the world? And I decided, wrongly, that it was preaching. And I asked my colleagues, and they laughed, much like Jesse. But what priests want to do more than anything in the world is celebrate the Eucharist, right? And so they're willing to do the hard work to make that U-turn to be able to do that. They need the services and supports and resources brought to bear. We know that it takes about 5 to 7 years for somebody's brain chemistry to return to the likelihood of them becoming re-addicted, if you will, is below 15%, which is what the general population's likelihood of experiencing a substance use disorder in the first place. College students is a population that has become, figuring out what do they want more than anything else in the world is what will cause them to kind of have that change of mind, change of heart, change of course. And then again, those resources have to be brought to bear. I have the firm belief that if anyone had the resources that were brought to bear for me to get well and stay well, everybody. I mean, it would be the expectation for everyone. The other thing that I think is hard, and as people who have gone through this process with loved ones or gone yourself, right? We think that our loved ones are going to treatment often because they want to be in recovery. And most of us don't go to treatment for that reason. And so again, one of those pieces that it's like, oh, I never thought about that. The other piece that I commend to you is that only one treatment center in the United States says that your loved one is going to get and stay sober, right? But most of us assume that that's what the treatment centers are selling. But they never tell you that. No treatment center, except for one, will tell you that. And so we make some expectations, and they allow us to make those expectations, not really knowing what we are receiving. They don't have to tell you what success looks like or how they measure it. And parents and family members are so desperate and so tired that they just make choices, much like the gentleman in the film did, that are out of that desperation. Your behavior makes sense, just like the person you love's behavior makes sense. Yes?
So what do college students want more?
They want the opportunity to continue to be who they want to be when they grow up, is how we describe it.
I have 2 and almost 3 college students.
Ask them often, what do you, and regardless of whether they get there or not, it gives them the hope to get up every day and face the really difficulties that they have. So just keep asking them. And when they aren't able to be successful at it, listen to how difficult it is for that not being so, right? Because another big piece of addiction and use disorder is trauma. And it's not the big T trauma that many of us think of, right? It could be, I was young and my boyfriend broke up with me and nobody asked me, how did it make you feel? Right? They said, you're sad, I understand your sadness, but they never said, how did it make you feel? That's a powerful, powerful question. Because we know that drugs and alcohol are going to make you feel good or better. They're going to ease that stress, and they work really good for those reasons as well. And so without having that question asked, how did it make you feel? I was a cadet at the military academy, and I trained for the Olympics back in 1984. Hot shot, way to go, broke my thumb, didn't get to go to the LA Olympics. The piece that I didn't know for about 20 years, and part of what fueled my use disorder, was nobody asked me, how did it feel to go from being an amazing athlete to having nothing? And it's like, wow, drugs covered that really well for a long time, a really long time. So it's about identity and meaning and purpose is why people make those difficult changes. We do things like we arrest people, right? People aren't afraid. I'm afraid to go to jail, but many people aren't afraid to go to jail. They'll visit jail often. And so that's not the deterrent. Asking them instead, I'm learning from these moms that we work with. They want to be moms, right? I want to be a mom. Many have no idea what that means. Or I want to have a child, right? That's what the other one that I hear. I want to have a baby. It's like, okay, more than anything else, they want to have a baby, many of them say. But what they aren't saying is that I want to raise a child, right? It's different to raise a child than to have a baby. And so we're working with many of them now saying, do you want to have a child or do you want to raise one? Do you want to have a baby? Because once they have the baby, they can move on. They've met their goal, right? I met this girl the other day who's been trafficked. She has 21 brothers and sisters. Her dad is really good at making babies. He doesn't want to raise any of these children and has never said he did. And so being able to get in there and go, okay, what's going on here? How is it that this man's behavior makes sense? Because it makes us really angry. But when we break it down and we listen to them, we can get underneath what it is that continues to propel people to do the things that they do. Us included, right? Our behaviors make sense too. You know, I've worked with family members who, you know, have gone places they never would have gone and tried all kinds of things in desperation to help their loved ones. Their behaviors make sense too. You know, they may look unusual. In desperation, we will do just about anything. You have a hand? Yes?
When someone has started recovery, what are the statistics for how many relapse over, I think you said it's about a 5-year period before your brain chemistry kind of returns. And I know you said your parents were cheerleaders for you. So do those cheerleaders start getting fatigued with those relapses, and how does that affect the person's desire to keep trying?
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it makes sense. So some of what happens, the science right now will say that it could take a person 8 attempts before they achieve what's called sustained recovery. So 7 to 8 attempts during that time period. And so again, what we want is for not necessarily parents, but community. You know, for some it's the 12-step community. For others, it's these peer recovery community centers. For college students, right? So now college students are picking what college they want to go to based on whether there's a collegiate recovery program there. That's really cool, right? We have recovery high schools now, where kids who are in recovery can go to, because they're not alone, right? There's others who understand them. There's others who can call them out on the behaviors that they're seeing that they might be concerned about. They have these recovery plans in place. So by having all of those things in place, if someone returns to use, it won't be for as long. And so just being able to go, I mean, I do monitoring with some clergy and with others, and you know, this one guy uses his blower 4 times a day. And not, so I don't punish him at all. You know, it's like, uh-oh, you tested positive. What's going on? And so we can figure out what course of action we need to take based on what's going on. He's like, I have been tired, I haven't gotten sleep for 72 hours. Okay, well, let's go. Let's get with your doc and see, you know, why aren't you sleeping? We need to know. Other questions? All right, we've got one more video. Do we have time for one more video? We might not be able to unpack it on the other side, but I do want you to see it.
Thank you for calling Shoes, Shoes, Shoes. How may I be of assistance?
Hi, I ordered a pair of dress shoes for my son, and he was such a wrong size.
I'm not sure I understand.
The shoes he sent just don't fit.
Did you try putting them on?
Yeah, we've been trying all morning. It's just not working.
Well, other people have been able to make that size work without a problem.
I don't know what we're doing wrong. They just seem way too big.
To be frank, in my experience, if your son really wanted the shoes, he would put them on and wear them until they fit.
No, he really wants these ones, but these won't even stay on his feet.
Ma'am, I'm sorry to hear that you and your son are unable to commit to making these shoes work, but we're confident we've given you the best option available.
This makes no sense to me.
Well, I can give you the number of another shoe company, but they'll tell you the same thing. Unless he can accept our shoe size, we can't help. And honestly, it seems like you're way over-involved in this. You need to stop cutting him so much slack. Let him know that if he doesn't want those shoes, he can just go barefoot.
He really needs help. His using is just out of control, and I'm afraid that something really bad might happen. But I just don't think that he's going to agree to go for 30 days. I just don't see that happening.
Well, taking the full 30 days is really important. Other people have been able to take the time needed without a problem. If it was important to him to get sober, he would be able to make this a priority.
I really want to help him with this. I mean, he says that it's really important for him to be someplace that also can work with his PTSD. I don't know if that's the best thing to do, but that's what he says would be really helpful.
I'm sorry to say this, but addicts come up with all kinds of excuses to avoid actually getting help. I'm not so sure that it's as much about PTSD as it is a case of terminal uniqueness.
I don't really think that's what's going on. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that that's the case. I just think that he's scared. And I just don't know what we're doing wrong.
You called us because we're the experts, and frankly, I want to give you some direct feedback because we see this all the time. You're clearly way over-involved here, and codependency is part of this for you. I think you need to take a step back and realize that your son could die if you don't get him into rehab. You have to stop giving him so many options. Tell him he can go to rehab, or you're kicking him out of the house.
A shoe company telling us to just make it fit would be ridiculous. But many families have experienced this exact scenario, only with much higher stakes. Families are trying to help using their deep understanding of the situation, but are being repeatedly told to just make it fit. This one-size-fits-all approach is demeaning and harmful, and being treated this way can be discouraging and heartbreaking. We all deserve to be seen and heard when we're seeking help.
So that's the other piece that we're often getting wrong, is that we are overemphasizing one pathway and trying to make everyone fit into it. There's 6.5 million people who are in 12-step recovery. As I mentioned before, there's about 25 million people who are in recovery, so it's clear that there are many people who are in recovery who are doing things other than and or in addition to the 12 steps. So being able to learn what some of those are, particularly for those of you who have younger people who are in recovery, because some of those things, one, aren't, I mean, sitting in a circle for a person who's an adolescent or has an adolescent brain doesn't help, right? But that's what we do, right? Or having them go to a meeting where there's a bunch of old people. It's not their peer group. It's going to be really hard for them to connect. So being able to match the resources, the treatment, the services, and supports that somebody actually needs to be able to get the help that they need. And again, I am available somewhere, I'm sure. I know Lucy has my contact information. I have a staff who is eager to be of support. We help people all over the country. We help people in other countries. Right now, I have the good fortune of having AmeriCorps members who are dedicated. They're called Recovery Corps members, and they volunteer with us to do whatever it is that I ask them to do. So they are eager to be of support. We're rolling out Recovery Corps all across the country. Right now it's Minnesota, Illinois, Virginia, but potentially Tennessee is next. And being able to get people on the ground who can be able to support individuals, families, parents, children, churches in the community with issues of addiction and recovery. So thank you for your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
A special thank you to Jane for being with us today. She'll also be preaching at the 10:30 service. Thank you for your time and sharing your expertise with us. And if you want to reach out to her, get in touch with me or Lucy and we'll pass along her contact information. Next weekend, we are celebrating the Feast of St. Luke here, our patron saint. And as part of that, we'll have special musicians gathering with us. And at the forum, we'll have Stephen Crump coming to share some of his musical talents. We hope you can join us. Take care.
Easier said than done, I know.